Okay. Hi. I'm so glad we got this a little bit figured out anyway. We're going to test something out, something new here, and talk to you a bit about divination and what we call MetaMagica. Divination for us is really a way of life. We live a divinatory life. We get up in the morning, we get a reading on the day, and we go from there. It's something, when we live it, it seems so normal for us. So many things that we do, I'm sure if you knew all the details, you'd think it might be a little odd, but for us, it's really, really normal. So sometimes, we forget that maybe we can share some of this with everybody else. One thing that we've been learning through the years is that the way that the reason we call this MetaMagica, think about the word meta or metaphysical, and the idea that it's like a extra thing or a secondary thing, but it's also self-referred. And when we do divination, it comes from our whole body. It isn't like a separate thing from our physical self either. When we do magic, we use our entire being. It's not just somewhere up in our heads or out in the world of spirits or whatever it might be. It can be really much more physical than that. And so we want to talk a little bit about how those different parts of our systems work with divination and with magic, and how we relate to the unseen world, and also be able to help you kind of navigate, because I know so many diviners out there. I know amazing people who've got a lot of intuitive gifts, and we want to be able to help you get an idea of how to work with that, maybe even a little bit better, or learn some things about yourself you hadn't thought about before.
So yeah, I think that the thing that I would say about that is that we're going to be doing this over the course of the next year, and so we're going to go into all different parts of what this looks like. And so in a really big general sense, I would say that meta means your magic and how you do that. And I do this because we're going to eventually be talking about chakras, not in the Hindu sense, but in every sense. It's a universal thing, and how people perceive. And so very often people say, well, I can't see anything when I look at my cards, or when I look into a glass or a scrying mirror or a screening mirror, depending on how you say that, that there's a thing that happens when some people do that they're like, oh, I can see all of this, and then other people look in and see nothing. And so one of the things that Kate and I learned when we met each other is that we work differently, and we work with different perceptions. And as we've worked with more and more and more diviners, Kate used to own a shop, and at sometimes she may have 20 different psychic mediums, diviners, practitioners, witches, warlocks, all working together in a single room. And we started to see that everybody had a different way of doing the same thing. And so even if you all had your tarot deck, like let's say the Rider-Waite deck, and you all had the same books telling you what these things mean or whatever, I would say that 90% of all really good readers didn't follow the book. That breaking the rules was the next step after learning the rules. And so breaking the rules meant learning yourself. And that's the meta part. The other thing is that I would say that the word magic, or magica as we say it, because we want it to be more like arcana or more like a thing, is that magic itself is all practices, all right? And I don't mean all religious practices. I mean, if you are Wiccan, or if you are Christian, or if you are Zoroastrian, or if you are African, you are all working magic. But at the same way, all magical people are defined by using the elements, using the physical, and using the non-physical or the non-corporeal. So what that means is, if we're to be strict about it, is that everybody is doing magic all the time. And so that's part of what we're going to be talking about, because that's how we live. To us, when Kate makes absinthe, that's magic. When we make dinner, that's magic. When we write something, that's magic. When we do divination, that's magic. And so, in a bizarre sense, everything is magic and everything is everything. And in a bizarre sense, everything is also, at the same time, it's meta. It's you. It's what you make of it. And so we're going to talk a lot about that in the next year or so. And all of this is towards a book that we have coming out. And part of our writing our book, though, is to try to understand how to communicate this to you. It's not just what we believe and what we do, and we're not trying to create the next best thing or the next new thing. We're trying to understand how people perceive, how people divine, and how they work with everything, how they work with the energies, how they work with fruit, how they work with, whatever it is that the more we look into history and the more we look into practice and the more we take the religion off of who we are and what we do, the more we realize that we are all together and all the same, and we are all uniquely different. And so we call that MetaMagica. And so over the next year or so, we're going to be doing these to have a conversation with you, as well as to take little bits and pieces of it and use this principle and show you how to do it and how to work with it in different ways. And even more important than that, we need to see that once you get this, once you grok this idea, how do you do it? How do you see or feel or do whatever you do? Because if we can create a common language, we can help people. And so if you're the person who looks into the pond and sees nothing, maybe you should be feeling, maybe you should be thinking, maybe you should be not thinking, maybe, maybe you receive messages in an entirely different way, so that the elements of looking in the pond is just not your thing. Everybody has a metaphysical self. Everybody has a physical self. And so the metaphysical self and the self and the physical self work together. And that's what we're going to be looking at.
Yep. I do, when you were speaking, one thing I thought about when Ted was talking about how we all do magic all the time. And to me, it reminds me of when people speak of mindfulness and being very aware of what you're doing. To create magic, what I find is that you're really finding the groove in the energies that are around you. And sometimes I wonder if it's sort of like a combination of you doing it and you creating it, or you feeling what's already happening so quickly and so intimately, and you're adjusting rapidly to it, that it almost looks like you are the one controlling it or making it happen, because you know how to tweak your actions to maximize the energy that's around you. And in order to do that, you got to know how to feel it. And I know that everybody's have those days where you're just in the groove, like you hit every green light, for instance, or things you've been waiting on all of a sudden start falling into place. Lots of different things that happen when you know that you're finding that place in the universe and the energetic currents or whatever it is that feels so good. And usually when you're there, it's because you're in a day, you're having a day where usually you're rested, you've been taking care of yourself, your mind is relaxed, you're finding joy in the world. And that's something that I find helps me find those grooves is when I let go of the idea of controlling any of that, and I start to just sort of reach out and taste it or touch it or feel what's going on around me. And you can tell, like as I'm talking now, the parts of my body I might use to intuit things. And if you listen to your own languaging, that gives you a clue too. You know, people talk about a gut feeling. So many people say, I had a gut feeling. You know, literally, you can feel that in your gut. Sometimes I have head tingles, you know, like it feels like my hair is standing on end. There are different places in you that respond to the energies around you. And when you can tap into those and you understand your own way of communicating with those energies around you, then you start to have conversations that are freaking amazing, and stuff happens, like good stuff happens, and you find your way into creating magic. And it can be really simple and it can be huge. It doesn't matter, because it all adds up, it all layers up. You know, it's like when you're working magic or you're working a spell, you want to layer that thing, you want to be really specific and layer it. So all those little things that happen, they build and they build and they build, and you start to create, you can create a whole new life just by finding those little groups in the energies around you.
I think that part of that is why practice and ritual is so important. When you think about the practices that you may learn from whatever path you come from, or if you're a solitaire and work whatever you do, I don't think there's any one right or wrong way to come to your own practice. But when you layer your practice, well, like Kate was saying, you are entraining yourself and you are training yourself at the same time. So like if you were to do your tarot every day, and every day you light your candle or you light your smudge or whatever that thing is that you link yourself to that particular practice, and whatever it is, the light of the candle, the smell of the smudge, the physical act of doing those things, when you do them over and over and over and over again, pretty soon the light of candles or the smell of smudge puts you in a certain mood. And so what you're doing is you're using the physical to entrain yourself to go into a certain state that allows you perceive or to get into that groove better. And we are over the next year going to talk a lot about the groove and what the groove is, because we talk about it a lot. And we talk about it like in terms of synchronicity, like when you hit all the green lights, but also when you hit all the red lights, that's saying something to you too. So your obstacles are as much symbols to you as they are as they are challenges. But it's also the universe telling you slow down, or the universe telling you that you need to go inside, or the universe telling you that you're just not in rhythm with the guy who designed that particular strip of lights. There are all kinds of things that go into it, and part of what we believe is important is practice. In fact, sometimes you practice so much that after a while you no longer need practice. After a while, you can smell smudge in a store and go into that state, or you can go into that state and no longer smell smudge at all. It's just the more layers that you add and the more things that you do, the more rich your practice becomes, but the more possible it comes for you to get into that groove, get into that space, get into that set. And I don't want to use words like mindfulness or mindset, because like I find with people who practice Hinduism and Buddhism, it's not really a mind thing, at least not for everybody. Some of you will operate from the mind. Some of you will operate from the heart. Some of you will operate from the gut. Some of you will operate from a more sexual place, like you are not getting a gut knowing, you're getting a womb knowledge, or in the same way your head might tingle, your groin might tingle, you know. Everybody has different ways, and it's not just one or the other place or chakra or sensory place on you. Everybody has combinations, and so we're going to talk about some general combinations over the year, and we're also going to talk about strange and anomalous things, so that some people read with their hands and fingers, and some people read with their eyes, and some people read with their eyes closed, and some people connect with sound, and some people connect with all kinds of different things. So in the same way you might, I don't know if you're familiar with ASMR, but in the same way you might connect with the sound of crunching soap, or or a crackling fire. They give you head tingles. That's what ASMR literally means. It's that feeling you get on top of your head that goes all the way down to the back of your neck, that becomes very pleasing and satisfying to you, and works with you and puts you in a certain mood. Look up ASMR on YouTube, and it's the most wild universe, but it's also how the generations that are alive now are relating to their sensory abilities and their perception. And I mean the physical ones as well as the metaphysical ones. And we're going to keep linking the physical and the metaphysical, the chemical and the alchemical, the neurological, and the neuro-unlogical. We're going to talk about, you know, the neural system that you have that has no nerves, and how that's related to the chakra system. And so in the next year, we may go into science one time, and we may go into deep woo stuff. We may go into other practices from other cultures, and usually we'll be mixing it all together and trying to create layers and also options. And I say that because it's important to me that you believe that you can do this. And that just because somebody taught you something and you couldn't do it, does not mean that you can't do it. It means that you can't do it the way they do it. People teach what they know, and they mostly assume that everybody, excuse me, does this the same way. We're going to give you options. We're going to hear from other people and how they do it. And we're also going to try to create a common language. And so the first two words that you need to know is meta. You can look that up. And that's basically very much being self-referred. So a metaphor is something you understand, right? And enlightens you personally. And if it's not a metaphor for you, then it's just an analogy. And so we want to make the analog into meta. And the second thing is we want to start defining all practices, even mundane earthly practices, as magic. And so that's the Magica part. And so that's the next year of this stuff. But every time we get together, we're going to probably focus on one thing. And so this time we're going to focus on what we do in a very general sense. And so we have some examples here for you.
For tools?
As far as tools, and as also far as personal perceptions. Like Kate may pick up a tool and she'll say, this is how I do it. And I'll say, well, this is how I do it. So, and then we'll compare notes, or we'll also, and don't assume that there's a left and a right, or a black and a white, or a male and a female, or a his and a hers. That we're not talking about dualities. We're talking about, I don't have a word for that yet. I guess we have to invent a word. We're talking about how all things work and how all things are different. So if there were three of us here, there would be a third way, and there would be 7 ways. And it would be very weird to find us all doing it in the same way. And very often you find that people are drawn to, for instance, a coven because they absolutely have the ability to work together in exactly the same way. Or some people entrain other people's and just follow them and become overwhelmed by one person's way of doing something. But that's not necessarily how everybody works. And so I think that the third thing I would say is that we want to de-religionize what we do. That it's important to belong to paths, it's important to belong to religions, it's important to belong to modes of practice, and it's important to learn as much as you can in both focused narrow ways and broad general universal ways. And we're going to talk about all of that.
Yeah, I do think that, what Ted is saying is true. It's, it's like when I do art, I need to learn all the techniques, all the brush strokes, color mixing, the science of it, the kind of heady stuff. And once I know that, then I can play with it. Then I can create things. I mean, if you look at Picasso, for instance, I think is a great example of he did some really bizarre abstract paintings, but he also did some very, very classical style paintings. He could do both. He learned how to do one way, but then he found his own expression and started creating these abstract forms. And I think that in anything that we practice, there's value. I believe there's value to religions. I believe there's value to certain lineages doing things a certain way, because like Ted was saying, when you train your mind or your system to go to a certain place, like when you smell a smell or you hear a sound, it's similar to that. You have generations of people who have been doing the same thing over and over again, and it creates pathways through the spirit world too. You've created, people have opened doors and created pathways. And we tend to be very, I don't even know if eclectic's the right word. We tend to be very open to a lot of things. I personally don't have a certain set structure that I follow. I find that when I try to do that, that puts me in my headspace, and as soon as I'm in my head, I can't do anything. I need to get out of my head. For me, that's where I can find that information that I need. When I stop thinking, when I stop trying, when I stop trying to force something, that's when I find that flow. And so I have, for instance, like behind us, I brought out a few of the tools that we use. The Mancala board, you might notice behind there, I don't use that, but it's a really interesting history to that, where, and I think you can talk about that later, about teaching our younger children divination and passing on tradition through games, through fun, through joy. I mean, I just think that, God, especially this year, it seems more important than ever that we need to really pay attention to bringing joy into our life and to freeing our spirits a little bit, freeing our heart spaces a lot of it. But with the divinatory tools, I brought my Isis board and the stones up here that I'll cast. Tea, of course, because it's not just for drinking. You can tell fortunes. So this is my grandmother's tea set that she glazed and painted. And so I'll use tea, cards, tarot cards, oracle cards. I'll say with tarot cards, for instance, I mostly use the major arcana because, to be real frank with you, I have a short attention span, and it's been really difficult for me to force myself to learn all of the minors. And I tend to not interpret them the way they're supposed to be interpreted anyway. I'll look at a card and I know what it's supposed to mean, but something else jumps in my head. An image in the picture will jump out at me and just start screaming at me about something. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the traditional message of that card. And it's during those times that I really have to trust and go with those thoughts and go with those feelings. And that's getting out of my head and moving into my heart. I go a lot from my heart. Now, for me, that's where I tend to feel energies. So when I do tea leaf reading and when I'm doing looking at images, that's so much more open. You know, that's so much more free. That's freer to me. And then my mind goes. And maybe it's the artist in me because I work with pictures. I'm better with pictures than words a lot of times. So I understand with me. I allow my brain to just, it's like, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Like looking at an ink blot or something, you know, and the psychologist, what do you see? You know, it's like, well, let me tell you, I've seen some really weird things in tea leaves. And the hardest part, I think, as any of you, as diviners out there will know, the hardest part with divining is trusting that information that you're getting. And you think to yourself, oh God, that seems really weird. Should I say anything? Should I actually, does that make sense? Should I let that person know this is the information coming to you? Do I sound crazy, or maybe it's wrong? And see, that's when I get into trouble, because then I slipped right back up into my head again and I start thinking. So as long as I don't think, I'm okay. And if I've given you a reading in the past, if someone out there is watching, I'm giving you a reading, I can guarantee you I have no idea what I said to you. I don't remember your readings, because I just start saying it. I just start putting it out there and going. And those are really my best readings. So if you want to come back and ask me about it, talk about it, I'll have a hard time recalling it, because it's almost like it comes through me, but it's not like me. And I do best when I'm in those spaces, when I can just let things flow and not think. And that's when I'm divining for somebody else. Now, for instance, in my everyday life, like we're talking about, you know, in the morning, we do a form of bibliomancy, and we'll read Odu's, or we'll kind of get a vibe for the day, see what's coming up, what do we need to look out for. So just kind of in a basic sense, but through the day, I try to check in once in a while, because again, I don't do well if I overthink things. I'll check in with my body, and this is how I divine, just to find those groups, those spaces, those little spaces in my day where I can make things happen. And I pay attention to where I feel things. So for instance, when I have a gut feeling, or something is gnawing at me and it's sort of in my womb, or if I feel nervous, or I have that kind of agitated, but it seems to be centered around my belly button, I know that something's going on with one of my kids. Just immediate, like, oh, that's one of my kids. And then I stop and I start to listen a little bit more. Who do I need to call? What's going on? If I get like tingles out of the top of my head where it feels like my hair is standing on end, then that's usually ancestral, or somebody who's passed on that's trying to talk to me. Now, if I have felt not just tingles upside of my head, but like along one whole side of my body, or the whole of my back, or something, like my whole self just goes whoosh, like it's up in flames, well, that's usually like if I'm in a place that's haunted or something's going on, and somebody just is like, oh, there's somebody standing right here, like right here, I can feel them, you know, but I feel them through my skin, through my hair follicles, through, you know, and so I get intuitions in different ways. And I'll tell you one that I know when I have an idea that is a creative idea, that is right, like it's the right thing. sometimes something will pop into my head, like, I don't know if I should do this or not, or I start to question. I think about it. Where I feel it, I know it's right if I feel it in my groin, right in the first chakra area where you've got, creative centers or whatever. They're just like, oh, like, okay, yep, that's the thing. That's what I'm gonna do. I have to do that. I'll know it. I get confirmation in my body. So I think the really important thing is for everybody is to stay out of your mind, stay out of that head space. And I can tell you like how it works in my body, like I was saying, but when I say stay out of your head space, I want to clarify that I guess I mean more trust. Don't overthink, as in you start to question yourself, because some people do use that headspace. Some people do just all of a sudden have a knowing, and it just kind of comes in here, and it's not a feeling, or it's not a vision. It's just all of a sudden you get this whole knowing and whole picture, and it is a head thing. That doesn't happen to me, but it does happen. So I think what I really want to clarify when I said stay out of your headspace, if that works for you, that's fine. What I mean is trust, start to learn how to trust the information that's coming to you and observe how it's coming to you. If you check in with your body, if you feel things in different areas of your body, because your mind can trick you, your mind can lie to you, but your body will never ever lie to you. It doesn't know how. So you need to listen and check in all the time through the day.
Yeah, I think that when I use the word headspace, I'm talking about your analytical brain or your right brain, or I very often, when I tell a story, excuse me, ask people to sit on their notebooks. People come to conventions and people come to gatherings, and I tell a story and they want to take notes. If you are splitting your attention between what you're writing and what I'm saying, then you're not listening. And so when you are doing tarot and you're reading the book, and what does the book say? And what does the book say that this means?
Somebody out there just got called out.
Sit
on your notebook.
Yeah, sit on that notebook, or sit on that book of directions, or sit on your 10 commandments, or sit on your bad habits. All of those things that you rely on. You're like the kid who won't take the training wheels off. Even though you can ride the bike, you lean into the one wheel until it falls off. I think that we are so religionized, and we are so dependent, and we are so doubtful of our own gifts and powers, or we are so far removed from our own way of doing things that we tend to believe and trust outside of ourselves instead of ourselves. And so if you are a mental person, then that is how you work. But if your neural pathways revert to external rules or external sources, or the training wheels of the book that came with your deck of cards, I think that it's not that it won't work, it's just that you will not have a meta-rich experience. In other words, what you're telling your friend, they could have read themselves. You take the card and just hand them that page. But what that page says is not necessarily as important as why they came to you to get you to interpret that card for them, and it may have nothing at all to do with that card. I find that very often I will turn over a card, and while the card speaks to me, and in my particular deck, and if you look behind me, I use the Mind Tarot, And I will use the higher arcana. I'll use 22 cards that each have 16 or more symbols in them, and each of those symbols will have 16 or more stories attached to them, and each of those stories will have 16, and it iterates out. I read in a fractal, and very often, because I'm so entrained, I've been reading this particular deck since 1986, and so over you do the math because I can't, but over the course of 34 or 35 years, I just did the math, so I lied. Over the course of 34 or 35 years, I have a lot of things that have layered themselves when I read, and so I become the book. I'll tell you the truth about that is I studied with people who did this particular way of reading, and I never read the book. My teachers called the Catholic version of this, and it's overlaid on the regular Kabbalistic Sephirah tarot, just like the Ritter-Waite deck. And so while I can read the Ritter-Waite deck, I stay away from the Judaic and the Kabbalistic and the Western meanings, and I move more towards the Mayan worldview in terms of how to be and how to read, but I don't follow the rules as much. And so very often I will turn over a card and I will just start talking. If any of you know me, you know that once I start talking, I don't stop. Kate's trying not to roll her eyes right now, and so, and the thing about that is that I don't see things. I've never seen things doing readings. I don't feel things. I don't have feelings like she has feelings. I don't have a tingle on the top of my head, and while I do have tingling in my groin, it usually has nothing to do with card readings, and so you're pretty much safe when I read your cards that's not going to happen. But what I do is that what I do is that it just comes out of me. I just start talking. I have no idea what it is that I'm saying, and I don't have any kind of a rote thing that happens. Sometimes it will trigger that I will latch onto a particular image in the card, but 9 times out of 10, it'll just come out of me. And it starts coming out of me at a rate that very often I will turn over the next card and I've already said that thing. And then I'll turn over the next card and I have to catch up with myself. And so part of how I read is not explainable to me. But if you've ever seen me do a sermon or give a speech, you'll see that I do the same thing. I don't write sermons. I don't know what I'm going to say when I go up. I have a general idea, and I have a what I think of as a general shtick, things that I rely on to make sure that I never freeze, but I never freeze. I go up there, and once I look into your faces, and once I see you, or once I look at the camera or at the right now I'm looking at my own image from 20 seconds ago. It's like being in the past. Once I do that, it just comes out. And so here's an example of how Kate and I work absolutely, totally differently. But in the morning, when we do what we call an odu is a story. We open a book that tells us a story, and we interpret that story. She does that totally different than I do. But very often, it's in synchronicity. She sees the same things the way I see it, except from a totally different perception. And very often, she will take something that I see on a very esoteric level and bring it down to a very practical level. One thing that she's really good at is that she hears the story in terms of the actual nouns and verbs of the story, and she'll see a physical pun. And that pun is synchronistically related to what we're talking about. And very often the pun has more to do with the reality of our life situation than the thing itself. And so, and and that happens in many, many, many different ways. Sometimes it's a word pun. Sometimes it's a translation from the Yoruba to the actual English, and how that word sounds in Yoruba actually comes up with an English word that makes a meaning. There's all kinds of things that can trigger you. And the more your practice becomes rich and the more your practice becomes meta, the better you're going to be. And I would add to that, the further and further away you get away from what people say to you, even what we're saying to you right now, because between what she just said and what I just said, there's another 50,000 possibilities. We're just a metaphor. We're just an example, and we're just a trigger. We're a living card to you in this moment, but don't read the book. Don't listen to us literally. Listen to us metaphorically, from whatever your perception place is.
You know, I had something I thought
I'm,
of,
I'm
and
just,
then I lost it.
I'm just looking at her lovingly, but I'm also saying, okay, it's your turn. When we do this in the morning, very often, I'll read something or she'll read something and I'll go, what did you get? And she's like,
more coffee.
And I think that it's very often because she's already been up for 3 hours and has drank the whole pot.
Mostly I do. We had to make more by the time he gets.
But when she hears something and she gets triggered, she just goes off somewhere. And so I just kind of patiently look at her.
Oh yeah.
It's a look of love, and then I say, "Did you hear me?"
Yeah. No.
Which is okay.
Oh.
Because she
no, that's me. I'm like, did you hear me?
No,
don't let him fool you. But here's what I will say. What I will say is that I love magic. I see magic in everything. I see, I sometimes I have to work to see the beauty in everything, but it's like the more you look for it, the more you see it. The more, have you ever bought a new car or something, then all of a sudden that's all you see is that same car on the street everywhere, and you thought you were so unique? It's bringing this awareness to you so that you start to see certain things in a certain way. And when you start to live a magical life and don't question it and don't try to rationalize something, but just enjoy the chaotic, crazy, wonderful, magical thing that's going on and that happens. And it doesn't, like, for me, it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have, like getting all the green lights. It doesn't have to be earth shattering for it to make a difference in my life and to create a magical life. That's what I want to live. That's who I want my life to be. And like you were saying, as like listening to us, Ted has an amazing brain for facts, for remembering dates or times or logical things, and getting to the science of something. And I appreciate that, and I love it, and I can listen to it, and I love to learn about it, and I will read about it, and there's no way I can say that back out to you. It comes out all a jumble. It doesn't, I digest it differently. And I think that's one thing, like when Ted was talking about that we're able to do, and I feel so fortunate that we can work in partnership, because I do like to bring it back down to earth. I do like that practical magic aspect of things. And I was always like that, in school or whatever it was. If I was just learning something to learn it, to memorize it, to test on it, and then forget about it, it would bore me so much. But if I could learn something and see how it relates to me, how it relates to life, how it relates to present day, how can I use this? I mean, that's where my brain goes. It's like, all right, that's cool, but what can I do with it? how can I make it work for me? How does it apply? How is that affecting the people around me? How, you know, it's like all of these wonderful, magical, ceremonial, whatever it might be things. I want to take those and say, it's kind of, my brain's like, yeah, but what do I do with it? You know, and that's where I would love as for people in general, but especially magical people and especially diviners, to use these things that you have every day, every moment of your day. Don't separate those gifts that you have. Don't separate that intuition that you have and say, I will use it here because I can only do that when I'm giving a reading to somebody. I mean, when you're cooking, I can't tell you how many times Ted's grandma has popped into the kitchen to tell me how to cook. And she hasn't always been nice. She doesn't think I can cook, but she's no, actually, it's been years now, but she trusts me a little bit more now, but she does come in and give me tips and says, hey, like you should put this on the plate, or you should make that, or make sure you line up the colors this way. And I do ask her if I'm doing something that's Indonesian cooking. Sometimes if I forget something, I'm like, oh, you know, and she'll remind me. You know, so I mean, it's like, it's an everyday thing. It's not a huge explosive Hollywood sparks flying kind of magic, but it's powerful and it's important and it keeps me connected. It keeps me grounded. It's kind of weird to say that something so seemingly, you know, woo-woo out there, spiritual is what keeps me grounded. It keeps me really practical. It keeps me feeling like I'm a part of the earth. I'm a part of everything. I belong. And when life gets kind of wacky sometimes, it's important to find that place where you feel like you belong. And so I know that like with everybody who's listening to us right now, I already know it's like you're one of us. You know, that's why you tuned in. That's why you're hanging out this long. It's because, you know, we've got that, the things that are so other people may think are abnormal, so much so that it's like it's normal. This is our normal. This is your normal. And I think that when we accept it and use it and live it and just let it, allow it to become a part of your life, it improves your readings too, but it improves everything about your life, definitely.
Yeah, I think that, and I want to add something to what Kate said, because what she just said about my grandmother may sound very mundane to you. And it's like, oh, a cute little old granny in the kitchen. Okay, my little old granny was not a cute little old granny in the kitchen. Um, Her father was the second richest man in Indonesia, in Java. And her husband, who bought her before she was born and who was 40 years older than her, um, uh, he was the first richest man in Indonesia. And they were both Mandarin Chinese families that allied together through the purchase of her. Um, and because she was a bought and paid for wife or slave, she grew up not knowing how to cook. My grandmother did not know how to cook, and she did not understand Indonesian culture until she ran away. And when she ran away, she hid the second time she ran away. It's a long story. But the second time she hid on an island called Celebes. And that island is the island of the boogeyman, the Boogie's Pirates. And on the east coast of that island was the place where the Mandarins, the Chinese Tongs, and so her father and her husband were both Chinese Tong leaders, and it was like the mafia looking for you. They did not dare go to the east side of Celebes, and so that's where she hid, and that's where she fell in love with who I think of as my grandfather. At the orphanage that she was hiding at, the Pentecostal orphanage, the cook there was a Chinese chef, and and he was a Chinese chef trained in Indonesian cooking, and he was the one who, as an adult, taught her how to cook. And so when Kate says things like how to arrange the color and how to slice things, she had to learn that as an adult. And so um, she's adamant about certain things. If you haven't guessed, she's dead. Okay. So my grandmother died like well over 20 years ago. But when she talks about things and when she teaches things, she's not talking about cooking. She's talking about what my grandfather taught her. And what he taught her in Indonesia is called ka. And ka means simply the way. It's like Tao. It's the way that you do things, whether you are Hindu or Muslim or Chinese or Dutch or Portuguese or Spanish. In Indonesia, underneath everything is ka. And ka is the way you do things so that when you're arranging food, you arrange food in the 4 directions or in the 8 directions. You arrange food to honor the ancestors of everybody you're going to feed. You never put this food next to that food. You never ever let this food touch that food. If you have a Jewish person coming to eat, you have to feed his ancestors. And so there are all of these intense rules that she lives by, that she learned from my grandfather, that she imparts now. And this is our shameless self-promotion, is that Kate literally wrote the book on talking to dead people. And so if you want to know more about how she talks to dead people, it's just a totally normal thing in our life. But it does invade everything. And so part of what we consider to be magic is the things that we learned from our ancestors, but also just from normal, everyday, synchronistic or syncretistic things that just happen. And syncretistic means I may see something that reminds me of something, but it reminds me of something because it's layered and layered and layered and layered with all sorts of other things, and it can happen anywhere. And so for me, it's like a sense memory. I drink really, really strong coffee. Kate drinks really, really strong coffee. One of my favorites is called Sumatra, and we get a brand from Aldi. And if you get Trader Joe or Aldi, they have the exact same brand with different names. Really cheap and really good and really strong the way we like it, very flavorful. But we went to a truck stop of all places, and they had a coffee making machine there that makes you a cup at a time. And they had the fresh roasted beans there, and it said Sumatra coffee. And we had a cup of Sumatra, and I smelled that cup. I instantaneously remembered my father, who always made Sumatra coffee, who always roasted his own beans, who always ground his own beans, who always went through an intense ritual every single morning of how he drank his coffee. And all of those things brought back multitudes of sense memories back from me, to the point where I felt his presence for the rest of the road trip that we were on. And I don't typically feel that way. I don't typically, it takes a serious trigger, but who knows why we stopped at that place and what we did or what, So how we live is very, very, is very involved in, those people who see a sign in everything, they're like spiritually ADHD, and everything that happens is an omen to them.
I feel called out.
Yeah, that's us. But in very real and serious ways, I think that you have to be honest with yourself. You don't have to be like wishful and hopeful about omens, but when they happen, you have to acknowledge them, And so whether or not my father was there, I smelled coffee the way it's supposed to smell for the first time
Yeah.
in a long, long time, even though I think I drink Sumatra coffee, I really don't. And that's a thing that happens all the time. You may think you know what a card means. You may think you know what a symbol or a sigil means. And all of a sudden, it becomes totally re-revealed to you so that you can never see what you saw before again. It is not just synchronizing with the things you know or syncretizing the things on top of things that you know. It is a continual evolution and a revolution of understanding and perception and relationship. So my way of reading is so colored by having somebody to talk to every single day that I feel blessed. And we realize that most of you will never ever have that possibility. It's very rare to actually know somebody else who does what you do or does it in a polar opposite way. But the ability for us to spend years and years and years talking about it really drove us to this place where we want to share it with you. Not just here, but also we're going to start putting it down in words in a book that we want you to read once and sit on it for the rest of your life. All right. You can better absorb what we're saying as a metaphor.
Yeah.
And we will probably write it like we wrote our last book, in the form of a story, so that it does not become dogma. We want you to have the storytelling part of your brain absorb what we say so that you can tell your own story and you can read other people as if they were books as well.
I mean, we
So,
find that that's a great way to receive information is through stories. You know, how many of you I know use pop culture for your divination? You're watching a movie or something, and there's an actor that says a certain line, or there's something in the storyline that triggers you or that makes you realize something else in your own life. And it's because physically we move into a different space. You know, it's when you're watching a movie, when you're relaxing, when you're engrossed in a really good book, and all of the other clutter in your life tends to recede, and your brain switches into another space and into another way of thinking and perceiving. It's the same idea, like you're talking about certain senses that you use, sound or smell or whatever it is, that same thing. That is allows a person to be more open. I mean, I think that's why I really, really like art, and something when we do, like when Ted and I do art together, we create things together that, or on our own. Um, we want to say something with it. We want to bring an awareness to people through that art because we feel that it's like getting people to shift their perception and enter into a space where they're more open to understanding and perceiving or changing their views on something or opening their heart to another way of thinking or feeling or being so they can see another side to a story. And I think that that's a really important thing to be able when you're communicating with other people to not be like an in-your-face confrontational situation or even conversations, but through visuals, through music, through acting, through all of those mediums put people in a different space. And it's the same thing with divination. You're in a different space where you're open to being able to see the unseen. You're opening your heart to be able to feel things that you hadn't allowed yourself to feel. And those are really important things to be able to do.
and I think that's part of what's going on right now. Pop culture is changing the paradigm of how we look at divination and how we look at ourselves and what we do. And so we've moved from a place where what we do is highly desirable and even beloved of certain generations. where when I grew up, you didn't talk about witchcraft. You didn't talk about being a witch. You didn't talk about many cultures practice what we practice. They just don't call it that. And so we want to use the word magic partially because we want to re-language who we are and what we do and what everybody does. I, um, I believe that in August, I think it is, yeah, in August, we will be introducing MetaMagica as a book at HexFest. And we will be talking about it for the first time publicly on a large scale in terms of a system or a belief or a paradigm at WitchCon. And part of that is that we want to get it out there to the world, but also because the creators of WitchCon and HexFest, Christian Day and Brian Kane, believe the idea that all of the different things, and you'll see 100 practitioners at WitchCon, all doing different things, but that all of those things are magical practices. And so if you imagine the more of us get together and the more of us that do things, that if you will go, and this is my ad, you need to go to this thing, but if you are right now, have the ability to go and see 10, 15, 100 practitioners and sit in a room or a virtual room or in a gathering with 5, 10, 15, 20, 100, 1,000, a million people, something happens. And part of the magic is not just information in your head, not just stuff that you learn, but the experience of the thing. And so what we are creating is a trigger or an excuse for the experience of the thing. And that thing is magical, but we want it to also be meta. We want it to mean something personal to you that's different than everybody else's experience. So we're trying to work on two different levels with two different things. I encourage you not just to go see us, but you want to see us first because, you know, we're the best ones there. But I encourage you to go to these types of things as much as possible, simply because to be within the energy of it and within the energy of many people doing a thing, you will experience it differently. It'll become a much richer experience for you, and you will be, you know, feeding off the vibe. You will be relating to it with other people, and that's a really important piece of why people religionize the craft and why magic is such a ceremonial and ritual, both repetitive and also group-oriented thing. And I think that we are doing that now in a different way. And so I think that our my generation, so I'm going to be 60 in February. So my generation sees magic differently. We see it from a fantasy place. And so if you imagine that the collective consciousness around magic or around the word witch in the generations that follow my generation, so Kate's generation is a few more years behind me, and then there's a few more and a few more, till the time you get to my children, starting with my oldest, who's like 30 years old now. That's amazing. That 30 years ago, you know, or 30 some years ago, when J.K. Rowling wrote her first Harry Potter book, they told her that she couldn't write about witchcraft and no kids would read words that they didn't understand and that they would never read 1,000-page books. And, you know, she has literally sold 5 billion books. Next to the Bible, she is the most read author in the world. She may lose that place soon, but we won't get into that. But if you imagine 1 billion children or more growing up with a fascination and a love of witchcraft and of magic, and the viewpoint of an alternative world, and with a languaging that already understands what a spell is, already understands what a ghost is, already understands what lineages are, and what the religionization of of a craft can be and do. That languaging alone creates this amazing, amazing ball of energy of literally billions of people who are way, way more open to the idea of magic than we ever were. And so what we're lacking right now is a language for that. And so we have many, 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 many languages for that. And so we are embarked on a 1-year march towards August to bring that as a paradigm to all of the magical practitioners of the world, to all of the young people of the world, to all of the non-believers of the world. Whatever you are, and whatever you bring to this, we want to do that. And so, so that's what these MetaMagica classes or workshops or fun shops or conversations are going to be like and about.
Yeah. I was looking at a couple of the comments here. I'm not, for some reason, able to go back too far to see some of them. They're not opening up for me. But I noticed, Winston, you asked that, because we were talking ancestrally.
Yeah.
And that sometimes, like, I will have ancestors or Ted's ancestors pop in and talk to me, and I feel them quite strongly. And I know a while ago I did a little video on creating altars for our ancestors. And certainly this time of year, cultures all around the world are remembering, honoring, all sorts of that comes up really big in right now, this time of year in particular. So like, for instance, Winston's asking that, what do you do if you don't know your ancestors?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're adopted, or your ancestors were really horrible people and you don't want to contact them, or there's been a rift in the family, mm-hmm. something, so his question is like, what, and I think that's really, really hard for people in the magical community, especially because we're really in tune to that, and it's all over right now about, the dead and mm-hmm. contacting the dead or honoring ancestors, and that can be really, really painful for some people,
and not uncommon.
And not uncommon.
No.
So you're in this. Halloween's coming up. Day of the Dead, All Souls, All Saints, all these days, this time of year. So what do you do?
So my first thought is that the ancestors that love you will find you, and I really believe that. Mm-hmm. And then you may have to go back 50 generations, but I believe they find you, and they find you in different ways. And so we don't all see a white specter or a ghost in front of us. We see all kinds of different things. I also believe that the Mayan view of ancestry and the African view of ancestry is that when we say ancestors, we have different words for those ancestors. I'll use the Mayan idea. So I have myself as an ancestor, me in every incarnation in this lifetime, okay? So if you go back in 9-year jumps, right? And so I'm going to be 60, and the math of that's easier. Anything that equals 6 is a 9-year jump, right? So 51-year-old me is an ancestor of me. 42-year-old me is an ancestor of me.
I've never
and so
thought of that.
Those things,
I learned something new tonight. I never thought about it that way.
33-year-old me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then 24-year-old me, and then 15-year-old me. is an ancestor of me. And 6-year-old me is my youngest ancestor, but the one that had the most pure vision and version of who I was going to be.
But you were talking at that point about
All right.
ancestral.
So each
backup.
of your own incarnations in this lifetime is an ancestor.
Jack, you can't hide from me. I'm sorry.
Hi, Jack. But I also think that you, in all of your lifetimes, and so we call that in the Lakota Mayan language, you say Tushilahe, and that's like my ancestor is me in every one of my incarnations, and so you always have that ancestor. Every one of your incarnations is you as an ancestor, and everybody has that. We also have Akalodahe. Akalodahe are the ancient ancestors. And so I think that some of us can go back in our ancestry and find out that we have 30 generations of European ancestors that hate who we are and what we're doing in this lifetime. And so that becomes problematic sometimes. Most of the time you find out that if you go back 4 or 5 generations, even the most Christian ancestors totally understand what you're doing, and that you are probably closer to how they practiced and believed and acted in their lifetime than you would think. How do you know that? Partially because Christianity, even 5, 6 generations ago, was something that men did. Women may have gone to church, but they didn't believe and practice the same way that men did. Typically, they had their own altars and their own practices that they did 7 days a week, while men only practiced 1 day a week, or men practiced seasonally. So if you're Jewish, this is true. If you are Catholic, this is true. If you're Italian Catholic, this is true. And so things that we think of as strega witchcraft or Asherah worship in Judaism are not goddess cults that are separate from the religion. It's how women did things. And so everybody has those ancestors too, right? But the other thing is that I think you need to start with the general intent of wanting to connect to one ancestor. Everybody, no matter who you are, has one ancestor that is in your life and in your corner. How do you know that? Because you have soul contracts in this lifetime that are related to the lifetimes you've had before and the ancestors that you've had before and always. So my biggest thing to you is to say, start with one simple altar. And it may be as simple as a mirror or as a candle or as a representation, an empty picture frame, some way and somewhere that you can focus. And then my advice is, because we all do this differently, is to sit down and do what comes to you, and what comes naturally. Sounds like a song from a musical. If you talk out loud, talk out loud. If you pray, pray. If you whisper, whisper. If you think thoughts. If you don't even know what to do and have never done it before, just sit there and see what comes out. And just focus on the idea that somebody out there loves you. Somebody out there is trying to talk to you. And that is your ancestor. And then whatever happens, happens. There's no right way to do this. And many, many, many of your ancestors, no matter who they are, will reach out to you in ways that do not happen at that altar or at that table. They may speak to you at the dinner table. They may speak to you when you're cooking. They may come to you in weird, different ways. They may show themselves in signs. They may appear in a cup of Sumatra coffee in the middle of a gas station for truckers in the middle of nowhere where you wouldn't even imagine they had good coffee. That was the best coffee I've had in 20 years. Um, the thing about it is that, like divination, ancestors talk to us in different ways, in different places, and with different perceptions. Some of us hear, some of us just know, some of us feel, some of us have tinglings, some of us have goosebumps, some of us have zero, nothing, and just sudden knowings. Everybody is different, except that the way you interact and perceive your ancestors will be as different as the way you interact and perceive with divination, because they're the same things. An ancestor and a crystal ball, a card, a glass of water, and a candle all speak to us in different ways. And there are ways that we can learn to amp up that experience or to learn that experience better, but all of us are different. That's really a great question.
It is, and I do think that it's difficult if I was speaking with one of my kids recently who can feel very sad that they don't feel that they belong necessarily with their whole family, that they're not accepted for who they are from other people in their family or ancestors. And that's a painful feeling. That's a feeling that's akin to grief, and it affects us very deeply. And I think that when ancestor veneration might not be, it's not a thing for everybody. But I understand wanting to do that so that you can feel somewhere you belong, that you matter, that you count, that you are seen and you are loved. And what you said is true, and that comes really down to sometimes a matter of faith. You might not hear, you might not ever know a name, you might not have a photograph, know the story, but I firmly believe, and I've talked to lots of people's family members or friends that have passed on, and they all have stories. But I know with, like, for instance, one person that I spoke with, her ancestral line that was closest to her was not connected to her, and they were very standoffish. But I did see, it was amazing to see, like, this whole line of people in the distance. It was as if I was looking across this field. It was all kind of monochromatic, kind of grayish tones, and a little bit foggy because they were far away. But it was this entire line of people, and they were standing there saying, it's like, we're further back or we're further away, but we're with you. We're not ever, nobody's an accident that they're here. There's a reason for it. I know that there's too many weird little connections and things that happen and things that move us as a whole together, that you belong, whether you know who your ancestors are, or whether you feel like you don't belong or they don't accept you for one reason or another. There, like you said, there's somebody that does. But me being more on the bringing it back to the practical side of things, like I was talking to my daughter too, I said, you know what, that's why it's really important to build community around you and to have friends around you. We have, through the years, developed friendships that these people are like family. No, we don't share the DNA, but they are definitely family. They are my clan, they're my people, and they have supported us in unbelievable ways, helped us through things, hopefully we do the same to reciprocate. That's why, we really want to whatever we can do, give back and to share and to bring everybody together. Because we all have stories and we all go through things. We all have these times in our lives that can be really tricky to navigate, especially if you feel like you're navigating them alone. And I think that for many people, having ancestral altars is important because you don't feel like you're alone. And whether that works for you or not, that it's okay. You know, you don't have to put one up just because other people are doing it or talking about it. You don't have to. I mean, some people, I've suggested that they don't because there's too much going on in their lives right then. Somebody may have recently passed, but the connections are not severed and there's still drama. Sometimes you need to create the space, and that's okay too, to create the space. And when it's ready, when you're ready, then things can happen for you. You don't need to push it. There's no right or wrong with that.
I want to also look at two different things too. First of all, if you believe in soul contracts, it is also entirely probable that many of your ancestors live in your life right now. People who used to be your mother or grandmother, or people who used to be your brother in another lifetime, or we all have those kinds of connections. And so in the same way you would have a relationship with a dead ancestor, you may also have relationships with live ancestors. And so we can't discount living ancestors who are in your life right now. And so we sit there and we build altars looking for our dead ancestors when they've incarnated into our life. And so, you know, maybe they're all in your life right now. That used to be very common when we would incarnate only within a single lineage because we lived in one village for 30,000 years. We would see the same people over and over and over again, but they would be living people. So venerating the living is very, very, very important to do. And then the other thing, and I work with this a lot, and so if you know the work that Kate and I do with Utu, anybody who knows Witch Doctor Utu or Utu Witch Doctor knows that we are involved with doing elevations of different Loa and Orisha and people, real people who we are elevating to the level of venerated ancestor or venerated Orisha or venerated Loa. And this is the creation of ancestors. And if you think about it, because I think this is at the base of that question, if you were an African slave and they separated you from your family and put you with other people who come from different countries and speak different languages so that you won't get together and rise up and kill your masters, you didn't necessarily know your ancestors or have a slave, or you may have been bred in captivity. You may have been ripped away from your mother at birth. So if you imagine that the creation of religions that are based upon not knowing anything or very little of what you are and where you came from and who you came from, then you'll see that the creation of ancestors is a very, very important thing to do. And so I'm going to hold up something right now, and I guarantee you that probably the person who knows the most about it is not actually seeing this. Jack Mercer, I'm holding up a skull of John, of Dr. John right now, and this is a practice that you see in some forms. My form of voodoo, this is Guinea Yoruba, and we work with skulls, all right? So when we work with ancestors, we're working with a skull and metaphorizing an ancestor in the form of the only piece of our bodies that stay. And if you were to be able to see this skull, you would see that it has all sorts of sigils and all sorts of symbols, and every one of those symbols relate to a different form of John, all right? So John the Baptist, John the Hospitaller, Dr. John Montané, Dr. John the Performer, John Ton, the Mandinka Warriors Society, and who Dr. John is named after. all of these things are part of the layers and layers and layers and layers of Johns that are held here. And so now we're elevating the person and the name and the energy and what all Johns have in common. And that's a form of ancestor worship. So if you didn't know your ancestor, you may worship all of the Johns that were ever involved in healing. And so this particular John is a skull that we will be working with, and we will be venerating, and we will be elevating it because of the pandemic we're going through right now. So all of the energies and all of the things that have to do with John and Dr. John have to do with pandemics and healing and what we call the plague gods and the plague saints. And so you'll have Saint Roach and San Bobo and all kinds of different versions of John's in this skull as an ancestor. And so the creation of ancestors is a very, very important thing that we can do, and why some people gravitate towards religions or paths that really aren't religions. They are ways of creating gods when you don't have gods. They are ways of creating ancestors when you don't know your ancestors. And they're ways of connecting when there's no other way to connect. And so that's one thing that we will eventually talk about. And I will talk in detail about this. But boy, if you go somewhere on Jack Mercer's Facebook page, you'll see an in-depth interpretation of the skull that I created for him. And because he is a John as well, he is a healing John, so the name Jack and Jocko is an African healer's name, and so so he has the other John skull that is in existence, and there will be this one and another one that will be revealed at Hexfest.
I know we went off a little bit ancestrally speaking, but it is the season, right? But I think that MetaMagica, what we were talking about, as it applies to divination, is a really fascinating thing for us, and important, I think, for people to understand that we are magical beings, and that we are, if we allow ourselves to open and to be in tune, and how that can change our lives, how it can make such a big difference, and put aside our disbelief, or put aside logical things. But sometimes, though, a lot of times what I love is when science does confirm or something that I've known intuitively, and more and more and more that's happening now. Like when we were talking about ancestors or ancestral stories, and science is showing how we do carry those literally on our DNA. They're finding that on the coding of the DNA, not in the DNA, but on the coding on the outside of it. Traumas, for instance, are passed down. Stories, our ancestral stories, are passed down. And so for me, it's fascinating to know, and I love it when I get confirmations scientifically when that happens, but it doesn't have to happen for me to believe, because I get confirmations in everyday life, little things that happen, like knowing that I'm on the right path if I'm hitting every green light, just little things that help bolster me and move me through my day. And as we continue to talk and do some other things like this, then we hope that you'll share some of your stories with us too. And we'll get into kind of break down then in more detail. Like I a little while ago, I did something on dreaming, that aspect of how we can open up to things and how we can use, excuse me, that part of us through dreaming. Ted is going to be doing much more in-depth on what he touched on is divination form with the cards that he uses in the Mayan divination. And so that's like a whole other thing. So we're kind of break it down into smaller bite-sized chunks, but we wanted tonight to put it out there and to reach some people and start the process, take the first steps and to start this. And so I'm really happy that everybody joined us tonight.
Yeah.
That, you know, we haven't tried Facebook Live before, so we thought, you know what the heck, we're gonna try it tonight and see what happens. And hopefully get better and better at these things as we go, because we really want to share this with you, and we want to hear your stories.
And they will be archived, so you can go
Yeah.
back to them, and you can catch them when you didn't have that the time to do them. And also, I really want to reiterate that we are very, very, very happy to live in the moment, and that means if we think we know what it was that we were going to be here for and talk about, if the Spirit moves us to talk about something else, or if you as the Spirit move us to talk about something else, we'll go there. I think that the thing is that we are not people who believe that we can't be distracted. We're people who believe that we need to be distracted and that we need to follow the lead of Spirit and who's there. And your intent is as important as our intent, and our relationship is what's important.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining us, and we'll keep you posted on some of the next things we're doing. Hopefully you pass the word on, help us pass the word on, and be able to reach some more people. We also do have a YouTube channel that we'll be popping some stuff on that you can check out when you have a chance, and that's Ted and Kate over on YouTube, so you can see us there. But we're wishing everybody a really good night, and hopefully we will talk to you again soon.
Circadia.com.
So you have a good night. We're gonna try to sign out.
All right.
All right, you take care,
Thank
everybody.
you for your patience, everybody.
Thank you very much.